Yeah.
What drew you to certain forms and why?
Yeah. So I started doing Chinese martial arts, specifically Northern Shaolin, with Bing Gong in San Francisco. And he was a student of Guolin Ying, who was one of the first people to start teaching Chinese martial arts in the United States. And that particular style of Shaolin, I now know, is extremely close to Chinese opera, almost interchangeable with Chinese opera. But at the time, it was just Kung Fu. And then later, I started studying dance. And I studied a lot of different styles of dance, many different styles of dance, because in that era, in San Francisco, there were 250 ethnic dance companies that were quasi-professional. And it was an incredible time to study dance. And I studied with Malunga Kaskulord, who had trained with soldiers, traveling with his father, who was a general, all over the Congo. There are 400 different languages spoken in the Congo, an enormous number of different dances. And he was a master of this. He also went to China in about 66 and to get military training. And so his depth of knowledge was not only of the dance and drumming, but he actually knew how to fight with these things because he had learned them from soldiers. I also studied with Chichers Das, who was probably the greatest Indian dancer of the 20th century. And he also taught in San Francisco. And he and his brother, his dance brother, Bacha, both studied boxing, also on a military base in Calcutta. And so he had a particular, what's called in Indian dance, tandava, which is the masculine energy. Really fast footwork, extraordinary fast spins, and the dance itself is actually made up of martial skills, as is most African dance has these embedded in them because, frankly, because women are attracted to martial prowess, but also because if you're going to teach someone to fight, the best way is to teach them through play, and dance is a form of play. So traditional dances all over the world actually incorporate dance. Dances all over the world actually incorporate martial skills. So as I was studying, I continued to study Chinese martial arts through this whole period of learning all these different dances, and I learned a great many dances. I studied ballet as well with Alonzo King, and I studied pre-classic dance. I studied European folk dances. I studied Caribbean dances, Haitian dance particularly. And so this weird thing happened where I could actually see how to fight with all these different dances. And it was strange because in the dance world, everyone was pretty much saying, yeah, this stuff is just for dancing, it's mating rituals, it's for beauty, maybe for storytelling. But I could see all these fighting skills. And at the same time, I was looking at the martial arts. I was learning Shaolin, for instance, which has an enormous amount of theatrical skill built into it. For instance, you have this technique where you punch straight up, and at the same time you look left, and that draws the audience's eyes to another direction. And you have these really long, stretched out positions where you're gazing off into the distance, saying, like Romeo saying, "I love you," and then suddenly, "But I can't marry you." So very dramatic withdrawal, this kind of physicality, and but the same thing. My teachers were like, "Well, it's good for health. But it's mainly about fighting." And then I studied Chen style Tai Chi, which because I was studying Indian dance, I was able to read the mime because the mime that's in Chen style Tai Chi is is very close to Chinese opera, which is a very similar style of mime to Indian classical dance. There are many different styles of mime around the world, but the conventions of mime are different. And these happen to be similar enough that I could read the mime. So it has this, mixing the golden elixir and then drinking it, and then suddenly becoming a butterfly, which means waking from a dream. It's a trope, a theatrical trope in Chinese culture. And then putting on his pants, tying his belt, putting on his hat, Zhang Sanfeng, combs his beard, ties his belt, steps outside, and what does he see? It was absolutely self-evident to me, experientially, that Taiji was full of mime, but there was no explanation for why that would be.
Okay, let's maybe...
People often ask the question, what is all this mime doing in a martial art? And the answer is a little bit complex. I start off by just saying, people don't think of the waltz as a martial art either. The waltz in many European folk dances, in fact, I would argue most European folk dances are martial arts or were martial arts first. And this could be its own film. But clearly the waltz is an extraordinary set of martial skills. If you can do the waltz really well and you understand how to fight with it, you can.
Can you give an example?
Of how to fight with the waltz. Well, the way the waltz works is you're attaching to someone's center. So you're becoming a master at moving someone else's center. We even have the term in English, dance him out of the hall or waltz him out of the room, because it's so good for ejecting someone from a room. But it's also, you use a frame. Your body holds a certain frame, which, if you've ever been involved in martial arts, one of the ways you can tell the skill level of the person you're engaging with is how well they keep their frame. This is the same skill that's used in ballet for doing lifts. The reason the women look like they're styrofoam being thrown up in the air is because they're so good at holding their frame, they're easy to lift. But this is also a martial skill. And so it translates. Oftentimes, the martial skills and dance skills translate. You can, as long as you understand the martial skill in being taught, you can translate back directly to its usage. And you also have, so the waltz and many dances are made up of drop steps and up steps. And if anybody who studied boxing knows what a drop step is, it's the way you use your entire mass to dropping down, and you transmit that forward into a punch. And it's a way, if you're going to ever hit someone fast, multiple hits, you need drop steps. It's the only way to do it. And most dances are constructed around drop steps. And up steps are used for unbalancing or turning fast, maneuvering. So once you understand that, it's quite easy to see how dances could be used for fighting, and also how fighting skills could become dances. The mime specifically is a trickier question, because there's no obvious reason why mime can be used for fighting. But if you put your hand in this position, or whether you put your hand in this position, or you put your hand in this position, if you know how to do a drop step, you can hurt somebody with it. It doesn't matter what position it's in. So the full range of motion can be used for fighting anyway.
Okay. How about African dance and fighting?
So African dances are often constructed around martial skills, because the displays were often for a king, displaying a warrior skill. There are often celebrations of war, of winning a war, and they were training for war. They were often very complex rituals. They weren't just dances. They were had played a social function in fact, in kingship rituals. So I was down in Trinidad and Tobago studying Kalinda, and those are kingship rituals where people are actually, they in fact call them kings when they win. And they actually have competitive sport, stick fighting. It's not really sport; it's a competitive ritual. There's a bloodletting element, and it's clearly a dance. It's not separated there. They think of it as a dance. They also think of it as fighting, and so that's often the case that they are already considered one. Everyone knows the example of capoeira already.